Sarah Vaughn had been told she was nothing for so long that she had almost started to believe it. She was 22 years old, and she had spent every single one of those years inside the Ashford Pack, cleaning, cooking, carrying things, staying quiet, and pretending she did not hear the things people said about her. The pack was large and proud, full of wolves who shifted easily and ran fast under the moon. Sarah could not shift. She had no wolf. She had tried when she was 16, the age when most wolves first changed, and nothing had happened. She had stood in the forest alone, waiting, hoping, and then walked back home in silence. After that, things were never the same. She was moved from the main living quarters to a small room near the kitchen. She was taken off the roster of pack members who would ever be trained, presented, or considered for anything. Alpha Thorne, the head of the Ashford Pack, was a man who cared deeply about appearances. A wolfless girl was not something he wanted anyone to notice, so he made sure they didn't. His daughter, Maren, was the opposite of Sarah in every way. Maren was tall, bold, and extremely aware of how beautiful she was. She had shifted at 15, ahead of everyone her age, and had never let anyone forget it. She had made a habit of reminding Sarah of her place, not loudly, not always with words, but in the small, precise ways that leave marks no one else can see. Sarah had learned to be invisible. She had learned to carry a tray without spilling, to finish her work before others woke, and to walk through a room without anyone needing to acknowledge her. She told herself it was fine. She told herself she did not need anything from these people. Most days, she almost believed it. Then the king came. The announcement had gone through the pack like a current of electricity. King Calum Draven, the alpha king of all packs, was conducting his annual inspection of regional territories. The Ashford Pack was on his route. For 3 days before his arrival, the pack compound had been cleaned, decorated, and reorganized. The ranked members rehearsed how to stand. Maren changed her outfit 4 times. Sarah was told, plainly and without apology, that she would not be part of the presentation. She would serve food and stay in the back corridors. She nodded and went to the kitchen. She told herself it did not bother her. The king arrived in the late afternoon, when the light was turning gold and long across the courtyard. Sarah watched from a narrow window in the corridor as he stepped out from a large black vehicle. He was tall, genuinely tall, in the way that made the space around him feel smaller. He wore dark clothing, nothing elaborate, and he moved without any hurry. His face was composed and unreadable. 2 guards flanked him, and a man who Sarah would later learn was his beta, Rowan, walked just behind his left shoulder. Alpha Thorne rushed forward with a wide smile. The king gave him a single firm handshake and said something short. Then he turned and looked at the pack assembled in the courtyard, and his eyes moved slowly across every face. Sarah pulled back from the window before his gaze could reach the corridor. She went back to the kitchen and picked up her tray. The gathering moved inside the main hall. Music played softly. Food was carried out. Sarah moved between the corridors and the hall, keeping to the edges, keeping her eyes down. She heard Maren laughing loudly at something, performing happiness for the king. She heard the ranked males trying to sound impressive. She kept walking. It was in the back corridor, on her 3rd trip of the evening, that 2 of the pack's ranked males cornered her. They were not the worst men in the pack, but they were the kind of men who became their worst selves when they felt unimportant. The gathering had made them feel small. The king had looked through them the way a man looks through a window at something far away, and finding Sarah alone in a corridor was an easy way to feel large again. They said things, cruel, unnecessary things. And then one of them put his hand against her shoulder and shoved. Sarah stumbled. The tray went sideways. Plates hit the stone floor with a sound that rang out sharp and clear in the quiet corridor. She crouched to pick up the pieces. She kept her face down. She focused on her hands. She had learned that looking up, reacting, crying, any of it only made things worse. So she stayed low, and she cleaned up the mess, and she waited for them to get bored and walk away. They didn't get the chance. A shadow fell over the corridor from the far end. Both men went very still. Sarah looked up. King Calum Draven was standing at the entrance to the corridor. He was not looking at the broken dishes. He was not looking at the 2 men. He was looking at her, or more precisely, he was looking at her in a way that felt like something deeper than just seeing. His jaw was set, Something in his expression was controlled very carefully, the way a person controls their face when something strong is moving through them. He said 2 words to the men, "Get out." The tone was quiet. It did not need to be anything else. Both men left so quickly that Sarah almost wanted to laugh, but she didn't. She got to her feet and began stacking the unbroken plates. "I'm sorry about the noise, Your Majesty," she said. "I'll have this cleaned in a moment." He didn't respond. She could feel him still standing there. She kept her eyes on the plates. "What is your name?" he asked. She looked up. "Sarah. Sarah Vaughn." He said nothing else. He stood there for another few seconds, long enough that it became unusual, and then he turned and walked back toward the hall. Sarah stood in the corridor alone. She put the plates on the tray. Her hands were completely steady, but something in her chest was moving in a way she could not explain. That night, she told herself it meant nothing. A king had asked her name. It was a polite gesture after an uncomfortable situation. That was all. She believed that for almost 12 hours. The next morning, she was alone in the kitchen before sunrise, boiling water and preparing the first trays of the day, when she heard footsteps behind her. She turned, expecting one of the kitchen staff. King Calum was standing in the doorway. He was alone. No guards, no Beta Rowan, no formal posture. He was still wearing the kind of clothing that cost more than her entire room, but the rigid ceremony of last night was gone from his face. He looked like a man who had not slept very well. "Your Majesty," she said immediately, straightening. "You don't have to do that," he said. He stepped into the kitchen. He looked around briefly at the quiet room, the low light, the early morning stillness. Then he looked at her. "How long have you been part of this pack?" "My whole life," she said. "You weren't presented at the inspection." It wasn't a question, he had noticed. She felt the smallest twist of something uncomfortable. "No," she said. "I'm not considered an asset for formal presentations." He was quiet for a moment. "Why not?" She met his eyes. He seemed like the kind of man who would respect a direct answer more than a careful one. "I don't have a wolf," she said simply. "I never shifted. So I don't fit into the pack in the way the pack needs people to fit. I do other work." He looked at her for a long time without speaking. She did not look away. She had nothing to hide and nothing to perform, and somehow, that steadiness felt easier with him than it did with people she had known for years. "What kind of work?" he asked. "Whatever needs doing," she said. Something moved across his expression. Not pity, she was relieved to find. It was something more thoughtful than that. He asked if he could walk with her later that morning, telling her he needed to see the forest border as part of his inspection. She agreed, not knowing what else to say. What she did not know, what she had no way of knowing, was what was happening inside him during that conversation. His wolf, the ancient spirit called Vale that had lived in the Draven bloodline for generations, had been growing louder in his chest since the moment he had walked into that corridor the night before. Vale was not a regular wolf. Vale was something far older, a first spirit, a primordial thing that had existed before the packs, before the territories, before the laws of the wolf world had even been written. He had lived quietly inside Calum for years, communicating rarely, moving in the background like a deep current beneath still water. The morning after he heard the crash in the corridor, Vale said one thing to Calum, clearly and without hesitation: her. Calum had spent a sleepless night trying to understand what that meant. They walked the forest border together just before noon. The morning air was clean and cool under the trees, and the light came through the leaves in long, broken pieces. Sarah walked beside him, without trying to fill the silence with unnecessary words, which he appreciated more than he could explain. At a certain point, deep enough into the forest that the compound was no longer visible, Calum stopped walking. He let Vale forward, just a fraction, just enough to sense the air around her properly. What happened next was something he had no framework for. Vale went quiet, not the quiet of disinterest, the quiet of arrival. The ancient restless energy that Calum had managed his entire life, the internal weather of a spirit too old and too large for any single body, simply settled, like a river finding its level. He exhaled very slowly. Sarah had stopped walking when he did. She was looking at him with careful eyes. "Are you all right?" she asked. He turned to her. "My wolf recognizes you." he said. He had decided, somewhere in that sleepless night, that if this moment came, he would simply tell her the truth. She was quiet for a moment. What does that mean? I'm still finding out, he said honestly. He told her more later. Not all at once. He wasn't a man who gave everything in one sitting, but enough. He told her that Vale was different from other wolves, older than any wolf anyone alive had encountered, and that his ancient texts described something called a mirror soul, a specific kind of human soul, born rarely, that carried a frequency matching Vale's own. The ancient wolf did not exist to protect the Alpha King. The texts were clear about that. It had always been the other way around. The Alpha King was simply the vessel Vale traveled in until the right soul was found. She listened to all of it without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment, looking at the trees. Then she asked him something he had not expected. "So your wolf needs me," she said. "But what about you? Do you even see me? Not the ancient bond, not Vile's reason, just me, as a person." The question landed somewhere honest in him. He had lived so long in the world of power and strategy and ancient obligation that someone asking him simply whether he saw them was unusual. He sat with it the way it deserved. "I see you more clearly than I have seen anything in a very long time," he said. She didn't smile immediately. She turned the words over. She was not the kind of person who accepted things quickly, and he found he respected that enormously. The days that followed moved quickly. Alpha Thorn, upon learning what was happening, attempted to manage the situation the way he managed everything, by talking around it, suggesting that Sarah was somehow responsible for causing confusion, implying to the king that a wolfless girl from his pack was not worth the attention. Calum listened to all of it in the way he listened to things he had already decided about. When Thorn finished, Calum told him that Sarah would be leaving under the king's protection when he departed. Thorn opened his mouth. Calum looked at him. Thorn closed his mouth. Maren found Sarah in the hallway that evening. She stood with her arms crossed and her expression complicated. The bitterness was there, but underneath it something else, something that looked almost like confusion, like someone who had arranged a room a specific way their whole life, and arrived to find the furniture completely changed. "Don't embarrass yourself," Maren said. "Don't think this is more than what it is." Sarah looked at her. For the first time in years, she did not feel the need to look away. "Goodbye, Maren," she said quietly. She packed the next morning. There was not much. A small bag of clothes, a book, a few personal things that mattered to her and to no one else. She walked through the compound slowly, not to memorize it, but simply because she had spent her whole life moving quickly and quietly through these halls, and she decided that her last walk through them could be unhurried. No one said goodbye to her. There was no one who would. She walked out into the morning light. Calum was standing by the vehicles with Rowan. He saw her come through the door, and he watched her cross the courtyard, not with the measuring look he gave territories and reports and ranked wolves, but with something quieter, something like recognition. Vale, inside him, was completely still. Sarah stopped in front of him. She looked up at his face. "I have never been anywhere but here," she said. It was not a complaint. It was simply the truth, offered honestly, the way she offered everything. "I know," he said. "That changes today." She nodded once. She got into the vehicle. He followed. As they drove away from the Ashford Pack compound, past the gates she had never once walked through in her 22 years, Sarah looked out the window at the morning sky. It was wide and pale blue, and full of early clouds. She did not feel sad. She did not feel relieved, exactly. She felt something much simpler than either of those things. She felt, for the first time, like she was in exactly the right place, not because someone had assigned her there, not because she had no other choice, but because something in the world had finally, quietly, chosen her back. She had spent her whole life being told she was nothing, because she carried no wolf. No one had thought to ask what she was carrying instead.